Hey, what's up? Welcome to Updates with Mr. Warford. This is from my world history classes. So we're moving on to part 2 of the French Revolution. So when we were talking before, the French Revolution is heating up, but it is a revolution by definition, but it is more moderate at the beginning, meaning it is led by more moderate thinking people. As it starts to heat up and more violence is taking place, as people start to look at the leaders of the revolution and how they're handling changing the French government and they don't like it, it starts to become more radical. So as people across Europe continue to debate what's going on in the French Revolution, these radical factions start to take control of the new legislative assembly. Remember, they formed what was called the National Assembly. They've changed it to the Legislative Assembly, and it's going to be affected or influenced by two more radical groups. One group is called the Sans-Culottes. I'm going to talk about those in a second, and the other one is the Jacobins, okay? So Sans-Culottes literally means without knee breeches in French. So back in the day, the more aristocratic, the more noble class, kings, queens, nobles, well-to-do people wore pants, or men wore pants called breeches, okay? And they went up to your knee, and you wore these stockings and these fancy shoes, and that was a sign of nobility, of aristocracy, okay? The sans-culottes were working-class men and women who pushed the revolution into more militant action, meaning using force, and they were called the sans-culottes because they were without these fancy pants, essentially. They just wore workers' pants, long pants. So that's why they were called the sans-culottes. So they were a more radical group, and another one called the Jacobins, or some call them the Jacobins. They were an influential political club. They were a group of revolutionaries who were actually plotting the downfall of the king. So we're moving from less moderate action to more extreme, and they wanted to form France into a republic, not a monarchy at all. So eager to spread these ideas, the Legislative Assembly declared war on Austria, Prussia, Britain, and other states across Europe, and this fighting lasted all the way up into the early 1800s, like 1815. So keep in mind that the monarchy, the king, queen, their son and the rest of their family, they're essentially under house arrest in Paris as this revolution is going on. So on August 10th, 1792, a crowd in Paris stormed what was called the Tuileries Palace. That's where the king and the queen were staying at the time, because remember, after the Women's March, they were marched from Versailles into Paris, and they're essentially under house arrest in this palace as all this revolutionary activities going on. And a bunch of the king's guards are actually murdered, and they narrowly escape. So stuff's heating up here, obviously. A month later, citizens attacked multiple prisons that held nobles and priests that were accused of political offenses, and they killed around 1,200 of them, and it was known as the September Massacres. And here's a few pictures of this violence that took place. So radicals called for the election of yet another new legislative body, and this one they called the National Convention. So the Legislative Assembly is out, now we call it the National Convention. People had the right to vote extended to all male citizens, not just property owners. And the Jacobins controlled this convention. They wanted to get rid of the monarchy, get rid of the king, and declare France a republic. And they brought actual charges up against the King of France. This new legislative body was like, this king has done this, and we need to get rid of him. So what happens? Executions, okay? So King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, so the king and queen of France at this time, are both executed by being beheaded on what's called a guillotine, okay? Prince Louis XVII, okay, so that was the son of Louis XVI, the person who was going to be the heir to the throne. There's mystery surrounding what happened to him. Some people, he died at age 10, we know that, but some people think he was held in captivity, but some people say that he was put into a family to take care of him, and they neglected him. So it could have been malnourishment, could have been neglect, could have been he died of tuberculosis. We don't know. But the heads of the monarchy are all dead after this time. So Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, and Prince Louis XVII, done, dead. And here's some artist renderings of what happened to them. Again, using the guillotine to behead. And here's little Louis XVII sitting in his little room in captivity. So after the executions of these monarchs, we see the rise of something called the Committee on Public Safety. So in 1793, France is in a lot of chaos. They're at war with other European nations, including Britain, the Netherlands, Spain, Prussia. We've got food shortages going on. So there's a lot of chaos after these revolutionaries get more radical. So what happens is they create a committee that basically gets almost absolute power to save the revolution and to prevent a lot of this chaos going on. So they are going to rule with an iron fist so that the revolution doesn't crumble and fall apart. They tax all the citizens of France, so all 3 estates, and they are going to use that money for the war effort. But what they're most known for is what they did in trials and executions of so-called traitors. Okay, they were led by a guy named Maximilien Robespierre. You need to know who Robespierre is for your test. He was a lawyer and politician. The sans-culottes liked him. The Jacobins really liked him. The Jacobins were controlling the legislative body of this day, making the rules for everybody. But some called him a tyrant due to his actions later in the French Revolution. And so this guy was well respected and given control of trying to get control of France, okay? Whip it into shape, get rid of all this chaos as the revolution is happening. Here's one of his quotes. There are only 2 parties in France, the people and its enemies. We must exterminate those miserable villains who are eternally conspiring against the rights of man. We must exterminate all our enemies. So just from that quote, we can guess that he's a pretty nice guy, right? We'll find out. So between July 1793 and July 1794, this would become known in the French Revolution as the Reign of Terror. Okay? We had quick trials of people suspected of being anti-revolution. There were cases of mistaken identity. There were cases of misunderstanding where a neighbor thought they heard somebody saying something against the revolution, and they were actually wrong and got their neighbor killed. People were put in prisons and died of disease. There were mass executions by guillotine. Okay, here's a picture of a guillotine that would cut your head off. And spectators would show up, and they would yell, "Death to traitors," and it was almost like a spectacle that people could come watch. Thousands were arrested and executed. We still don't know the exact number of how many people were arrested and executed. But in order to gain control, the Committee on Public Safety and Robespierre were ordering execution after execution after execution. Afraid for their own safety, the National Convention starts to see that this is getting out of hand. Like, we've gone from fear of chaos to fear of tyranny. So they basically needed a scapegoat for this. Even though they wanted this at the beginning, they needed a scapegoat, and Robespierre was the obvious choice for that because he was heading up this committee and deciding all these deaths. And so he was arrested later, and for fear and paranoia reasons, they didn't want that to spread anymore. He's guillotined as well. So it's kind of ironic that after executing all these people and sentencing them to death, he is put to death by the same means. So we see a more radical shift, and we see the reign of terror, and then the French people start to realize that it's getting out of hand, and so they execute Robespierre in hopes that it will right the ship. Okay? Next in this unit, we're going to talk about how a guy named Napoleon Bonaparte comes on the scene. So look in Google Classroom, see if you have any new assignments. Have a great day.